Someone has to know more than someone else in order to teach.
I think we have to conclude the session because I think we're all instructed to conclude these sessions a little bit before time so that people can move in and out. I believe. Well, maybe we have a little bit more time if we've got any more questions. My watch may be a little fast.
There's still a lot of creationists out there, and in my state, I think they're in a large majority. Do you see something like this trial coming about nowadays?
Well, I think so, and I'm not a legal scholar or know the nuances of all of the legislation that's popping up all over the place. Kansas recently was trying to get it out of its state test, get evolution out, and these kinds of issues. So there are a lot of nuances in the legislation that comes up, and a lot of the proposals that come up, I think, come up for very blunt political purposes to mollify a constituency, knowing full well that it's not going to get very far. But you can go back and tell the constituents, hey, look, I tried. But the liberal atheists, we just couldn't do it, and because they threatened to take us to the Supreme Court. But I tried it. You know, this is where we're going to teach creationism as an equal time theory, for example, those kinds of proposals, which of course creationism isn't a scientific theory. But that's what I mean by the rather blunt political motivation, knowing that you'll mollify a constituency, but it's not going to go anywhere legally. I'd be surprised to see one get to the court levels, quite frankly.
Does anyone else have a question? I think my watch may be a little fast. I don't know whether we got a little more time. Okay.
You have that famous picture of, I think it was Brian, Darrow, and maybe Mencken. Maybe it was just Darrow and Brian. Do you have that in your book of photographs?
Which picture?
They're kind of both sitting and talking. They're both in suspenders and white shirts, no coat on. It was probably done by somebody famous.
Darrow is leaning over the table talking to Brian in that picture. Yes, it's in there. It's not in great detail, and you just about have to know who's in the picture to know what's going on. And it's a curious one, because the question, of course, is why are they talking to one another? Darrow despised Brian, and quite unlike in Hair at the Wind, they weren't old boyhood friends or anything, not by a long shot. And I suspect he's just leaning over the table, as maybe Denny can tell us. Lawyers have to do that even when you don't like the opposition. Sometimes you have to go talk to them.
There's always has to be a certain amount of civility. I think nowadays there's less than there should be. That's a lot of talk among the legal profession about that. But most lawyers believe that you're supposed to be friends, even though you may fight very hard in the courtroom, and you may say some things that would alienate you forever. I mean, but lawyers are supposed to have thick skins and hides, and supposed to be able to put that aside and be friends. And I think that there was an effort made to do that. And I know that Darrow, for example, I've read a lot of books about Darrow, and I know that one thing about him as a lawyer, he was always involved in causes. Compare him to lawyers today, they're famous for $1 million cases and big defenses, but he would frequently do what Mr. Caudill says. He would be concerned more about the issue than his client. And many times he would say that at the outset. He was involved in some labor causes. He was involved in some things. Of course, his other most famous case besides this one is Leopold and Loeb, a death penalty case. But he would always be more concerned with an issue than he was with his own client. And he would take the case for that, to dramatize that issue. And I don't think he made nearly as much money as some other lawyers. He had a lot of fame, but and certainly by the standards of today, and even by the standards of corporation lawyers of that day, he did not make a lot of money.
Yeah, and the Loeb-Leopold trial is one of the reasons that he was in the headlines, too. That had concluded just, was it a few months, I think, before the Scopes trial started. So Darrow was well known. The Loeb-Leopold was where the two Chicago teenagers murdered a a schoolmate. It was just a thrill killing, just to see if they could do it and get away with it. And what Darrow managed to do was to keep them from the death penalty. And then what was novel about his defense was the insanity defense.
I think it would be interesting if we got a minute or two if you could tell us where these pictures came from. I mean, who took them and when?
Well, they're from the Robinson collection at the archives at the University of Tennessee. And I looked but couldn't find photographers that were associated with them. They have, some of them were published, have been published before, I mentioned, and you'll find them scattered around, some of them in newspapers. So this tells me probably some old wire service photos. Maybe the services are defunct now, like United Press International. But other than that, and it's not one photographer either. It has to be different photographers. And I say that with a bit of reservation because I'm not a historian of things visual or photographic. But as far as even my ill-trained eye can tell in these kinds of things, very different techniques, very different framing, and some of them posed, some of them action photos, if you will, a monkey playing a piano, if that's an action photo, that sort of stuff.
Have there been any other books like this published before, to your knowledge?
No, that's what made it novel, was as much as has been written about the Scopes trial, we don't have these photos appear before. And they've been laying around in the archives, obviously, for all of these years. So one of those oddities that we think that ground is pretty well plowed historically on any given topic, and guess what? It isn't. And I think Larson's book, his Summer for the Gods, illustrated that well. If you had told me 10 years ago that someone's going to write a Pulitzer Prize-winning book on the Scopes trial, I would have just kind of slapped my hand against my forehead and said, you've got to be kidding. With all that's been written about that, no, it's not going to happen. But clearly, he covered some ground that hadn't been covered, and covered the same ground much better than what it had been covered before. So the lesson for historians there, I guess.
I want to thank all of you, and again, I want to invite you to come to the signing session and to purchase Mr. Caudill's book, and of course, it's not his book alone, it's the other authors he's mentioned, and it makes some good reading and some good looking. I'm very interested in it.
Thank you.